So usually when you tune into these episodes, you find that I'm giving some introduction about what cloud topic we're talking about. Today, we're going to be going down a slightly different road, and today we're going to be talking about mental health. Let's go ahead and jump straight into the episode. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Cloud with Chris. You're with me, Chris Reddington, and normally we talk about all things cloud. As we mentioned, this episode is going to be a little different. We won't be talking about cloud, but we'll be talking about another topic that is equally, if not more important. And I'm joined by a guest who I'm very happy to have joining me once again here, has been on the show before. So welcome back and thank you for coming, Andrew Nathan. Andrew, how are you doing, sir?
Good, Chris. Thank you for having me.
Great. Thank you for coming back. So maybe let's just kick off with a bit of context here. I guess we were talking about doing this show, I think just before Christmas. So maybe let's do a bit of context around why we're doing this particular episode here and what kicked this off.
Yeah, of course. So the back end of last year, obviously, we were talking a little bit before we went live, but yeah, last year, 2020 was rubbish for a lot of people. And the back end of last year, right before Christmas, I found out that I lost 2 friends to suicide. And unfortunately for me, I've lost nearly double digits of friends to suicide in the last probably 10 years. And so it really hit me, obviously so close to Christmas and all of those sorts of things, that we were losing these people. And, I guess just that they didn't feel like they had the ability to talk to people and those sorts of things. So I spoke to a friend of mine who is a military chaplain, and I was talking to her, and I think, as I said before, you and I are Facebook friends, so you probably see me talk about it personally a fair bit, like the "Are you okays" and those sorts of things. But I've never talked about it professionally. So my big thing that I wanted to do was write an article on LinkedIn about some of my experiences and things that I went through. And I guess just get that message out there that it's okay not to be okay. And I guess the most important thing is that you need to talk about it and get that message out there. So I'm trying to put myself out there and start that conversation for people.
Absolutely. And I think, like we've talked previously as well, I think I've had my own challenges in the past, which I'm sure we'll jump onto as well and talk about. But I think this is really the point in this session, is just for us to talk, for people to listen, and for people to realize it is okay to not be okay. Before we do jump into anything, it's probably worth calling out, of course, neither of us are medical professionals. So if anyone does want or need any help, please go through, the proper channels to do so. There is lots of support out there for mental health. But I think really what we want to do in this session is just talk about our own experiences and talk about what we've experienced, and make sure that it's out there for people to listen to and potentially relate to, and just listen in and try and understand here. So maybe I'll just kick off then before we jump back to yourself, Andrew, just giving a bit of my own background as well.
Sure.
I guess, what would it have been, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I had, I guess, what I would class my first challenges with mental health. Various triggers for me that brought it on. I think it was various stress-related factors. But then, actually over a fairly quick period of time, that went away for me and I was able to cope and deal with that, and all was fine. Until last year. We mentioned, obviously, a moment ago that last year was just a terrible year for so many people. And I think for me, the beginning of last year was kind of hard. In fact, all of last year was hard. We'll come back to that a bit later. But the UK went into a lockdown fairly early on in the year, around March time. And for me at the time, I was living alone. So, the rules at the time were you weren't allowed to go and interact with other people. You weren't allowed to go and meet with people. And it's slightly changed now that you have support bubbles and all these things. But at the time, we didn't have that. And the only thing that I had was work. So it was me, myself, and I, work, and that's it pretty much. My girlfriend I could go and speak to on Facebook Messenger, video calls, whatever. Same with my friends, my family. But it's not the same. Not being able to hug someone or speak with someone in person, it was tough, and it caused me to break. And that's actually why, if anyone has been following me, you'll know there was a period of a few months where I wasn't recording, I wasn't doing any sessions. And that's why, because I needed to focus on myself. I needed to focus on just my feelings and everything that was going on in my mind. And again, I'm sure that's something we'll talk about, some of those feelings that maybe you've experienced or I've experienced. But just want to echo, whilst sometimes it all looks well and good, people are on YouTube or people are recording and it sounds like everything's fine, that's not always necessarily the case. So it is okay to not be okay. And I just really want to emphasize that. So yeah, I guess, Andrew, diving into your experiences a bit, I think you mentioned there about the tail end of last year. I think before we went live as well, we were talking about a few other experiences that you had as well. So maybe if you wanted to jump in there.
Yeah, and I think for timeline wise, ours probably happened around the same time.
Okay.
So about 4.5 years ago now, I was, I guess for context and a little bit of background about me, I was a Special Forces soldier in the Australian Army. And so obviously I would like to say super fit. The guys I served with would probably laugh and say I wasn't, but definitely compared to where I am now, I would class it as super fit. And I'd always been an athlete growing up. Like I'd played high level sport. I'd played semi-professional basketball. I've represented my state and country in men's netball and all sorts of things, won national titles and all those sorts of things. So being an athlete and being a soldier was who I was.
Sure.
And I took a lot of pride in that. And then I knew I was actually trying to get out of the military. I always said to my wife that when my kids had had enough and said that they didn't want me to go away anymore, that's when I would get out. And my oldest daughter had that conversation with me.
Sure.
So I was trying to get all my ducks in a row in terms of, medical stuff so I could get support years down the track when I needed to. So I was going through all of my medical appointments to try and get those things, signed off and whatever the case may be. And I happened to get a diagnosis that I needed 2 complete knee replacements. And at the time I was 35 years old, still performing relatively well physically in a Special Forces unit and doing all those sorts of things. And I have 4 daughters, and I had always had this dream of, having a mixed basketball team with them and, being able to play sport and all those sorts of things, and to just like literally 1 40-minute conversation. And the surgeon just sat there and like he legitimately just apologized to me for 40 minutes that he couldn't help me. I was too young to get my knees replaced. I didn't fit any of the, risk categories. He said to me, like, normally for people that've got knees like yours, they're in their late 50s and they're, 30 plus kilos overweight. You obviously don't meet any of those criteria, and I'm sorry, I just can't help you. And so to have all of that, like to walk out of that 40-minute discussion and walk to my car and call my wife and to tell her that, like, no more running, no more jumping, no more standing in place for long times, no sitting for long times. Like this is like the diagnosis or the prognosis or whatever the term is that he gave me. Just like in all honesty, like I felt something inside break, and I cried like I've never cried before. In all honesty, like I sat in my car in that car park of that medical center and sobbed like a child. And like, and I wrote in that LinkedIn article, and the reason I shared that stuff professionally was just like in all honesty, it broke me. To go from this person who being physical, being active was everything I'd ever done, to be told you cannot do that anymore was, heartbreaking. And I was really lucky. I had some people back at work who understood. I had a wife who well, obviously doesn't understand why I joined the military and put myself in a position to break everything. She understood what it meant to me to lose that. And she supported me, and it took probably a good couple of years, honestly, for me to emotionally get over it, and to not see a basketball court and want to go and run and jump and touch the ring and do all that sort of stuff. And it's been hard. And I wrote in the article that, like, I talk a lot about my knees being broken and I can't do things and that sort of stuff. And I think that's part of my coping mechanism and how I deal with it. Like, if I make sure that people know that I'm broken, then I don't have to deal with the pain of them going, hey, come play basketball with me, and me having to say no, because it still hurts.
Yeah. It's that coping mechanism, isn't it, of being able to kind of get it out there very quickly so then you don't have to deal with mustering that energy to actually bring that back up and talk about that.
Yeah,
in a sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gotcha.
So if I get in front of it, then it doesn't hurt as much.
Yeah. And I think this is an interesting discussion, actually. If I take the mic for a second, explain a bit about my side as well. So, one of the things that I was just thinking about there is maybe for anyone listening in and thinking about times where they felt maybe I'm being stupid, or am I just, am I just overthinking this, or am I just, whatever those thoughts may be, right? I'm sure as I'm explaining this, people are relating to this, but for me, for example, and I'm sure this is for a lot of people in technology, right, is we're wired as these people who are high achievers. We're wired as these people who always want the best, always want to keep going, always want more. And I think it's really interesting, right? The last time that I had my challenges back mid last year, I did take some time off work, and I remember really clearly how's the best to describe this? Almost the duality of my thinking at that point. And this is one of the really important things, people listening in here, is the thoughts that you will get are not rational. These things are just not rational at all. And it can be as something as simple as, I need to go back to work because, people are going to think less of me. People are going to think this, people are going to think that. Or it could be as much as, you can't go back to work yet. And the interesting thing, but the reason I mentioned that is what's later kind of come along with all of this is part of the nature of the way that I think, the pressure that I put on myself, those high standards that I set myself. There are things that in my mind at the time, I was kind of, what's the best way of saying this? Almost making up scenarios in my own mind about how people would perceive me. And I would already prejudge those scenarios based upon my perspective and my opinion of what I thought. So getting into these scenarios in my mind and almost arguing with myself, it sounds really strange probably for anyone listening in, but for me, I can completely relate to what I'm saying here because that's exactly where I was. And there are people probably listening in thinking, there are times where you've doubted yourself or times where you've thought, this isn't such a big problem. Come on, you need to go and just pick yourself up and keep going or do whatever that is. And don't ignore those feelings. Like, there's something there and it's okay to explore that. It is okay to not be okay and just listen to those feelings. And going back to what you said there about the scenario where you said about that you're broken, right, with your knees and how everything has kind of treated yourself with your body. I think there's a similar thing in there with just that coping mechanism and that way of being able to just take that step back and go, right, I just need to listen to this. I need to understand this, or I need to digest this, and I need to take that and just do something with that. And I think the point I'm weirdly trying to get to here in a roundabout way is no one person's scenario is going to be very different to another person's scenario. And you should never compare those because, what you went through in your scenario, what I went through in my scenario are both going to be two very different things. And like the way that I try and describe it to people, I think you mentioned about, just sobbing away in the car. the way that I've described the feeling to people is like I'm at the bottom of a pit and there is just no way of getting out.
Yeah.
And that's the closest thing that I can get to describing it. And it's a strange feeling and a strange sensation. And I'm not saying that I'm perfectly fine now and I'm never going to go there again. You know, everyone's always going to have challenges along the road, but it's one of those things that talking helps.
Yeah, absolutely. And like acknowledging it, like that whole it's okay
absolutely.
to not be okay. Like if you, and there's a couple of things I wanted to touch on there. Like you said, like the whole high achiever thing too. And I think part of that is that when you get to that level of functioning, you know, like special forces soldier or like a humble brag, whatever, you know, people might laugh or whatever, but, you know, like an engineer for Microsoft, right? Like you're used to operating at that high level and you're used to fixing things for people. And so when something like that happens to yourself and you can't fix it, that's like a compounding factor to those feelings, because you're like, I should be able to get through this. I should be able to, like, I should have a solution to this, and you just don't. And honestly, that hurts as well.
Yeah. And honestly, just to jump in on that point, I think you've nailed it, because that was the almost mental tug of war that I went through when I went off unwell. Is I was off for the first week and I was like, right, I'm ready to go back. I've had this week off. I'm okay. And it actually took a colleague, a really good friend actually, who I was chatting with about it. And we were having a discussion and there were some questions he asked. I can't remember exactly what they were, but it was very clear to me at that point I was just not ready to come back. And it was, again, that pressure, putting myself up, you know, saying, right, you need to come back, you need to be able to help people. But what was interesting then is when I took the time off, I was almost putting pressure on myself to get better as well, so I could then go ahead and come back. And it sounds just probably strange for anyone listening in here and not being able to experience that. Yeah. But again, you know, it's that's what's the word I'm looking for here? It's not necessarily conscious, some of those thoughts. You know, it's just how the mind kind of wanders and lets itself develop. That's right.
There. And it's like, and those are I found like at the initial part for me when I was struggling is like, the finality of it for me, and you know, your knees are gone. And I couldn't accept it. I was like, no, there has to be like, oh, I can wear knee braces or I can do this. Like I can get back to who I was. And I think that's like some of those challenges for people, because, you know, some of the friends that I've lost, like if I take a step back and think about who they were as people and what they've achieved in their lives, and, you know, to me outwardly, you would think, oh, yeah, they've done well, like they've, you know, achieved whatever they've achieved, and, you know, fully qualified tradesperson, or, you know, whatever the case may be. Like they're, for all intents and purposes, you would look at their life and think they've succeeded. But as you were saying before, like there's the stuff that's happening under the surface, you know, that troubled water, right? Like that, what you can't see is what's dangerous. And it's those thoughts. It's that person had higher hopes for themselves, or, you know, it only takes one, you know, chink in the armor, I suppose, to make everything else weaker. And then, like you were saying, being that bottom of that pit and not being able to find a way out then becomes like, it's like I was saying before, it's compounding. Like those thoughts happen, and then you start to, well, great, I must be a failure, and everything I've achieved so far is just luck. Like it's not my skill, it's not my ability, blah, blah, blah. And then it just obviously expands and becomes bigger, and, you know, that hole becomes harder to get out of. But I liked what you were saying before. Well, I didn't like it, but
no, I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
Yeah. But what you're saying before about the whole, you know, people are going to think this about me, and the thoughts that you put into your own head. And we talked a little bit about it before we were going live. And I guess another little bit of background about me is during the world's biggest pandemic of the last 100 years, I decided to up and move countries in the middle of it to come and work for Microsoft in the US. And I've relocated my whole family, and I've come here. And outwardly, my children have seemed fine. They've seemed like they've been crushing it and doing really well and all that sort of stuff. But over the last few weeks, it's actually become obvious that my 8-year-old isn't doing very well, and she's been getting bullied at school and making up illnesses and things like that. So she can't go to school. And through talking over the last few days, I've tried to unpick it a little bit more. And it's like some of the things that have been said to her at school about not fitting in and not being from here and all of those sorts of things have made her not want to go to school and not want to be a part of it. But to your point, right, like she then takes time off and fakes an illness and has a day off, but then feels like the kids are going to have been talking about her while she's not there.
Yeah.
So then she doesn't want to go again because what have they going to have said about me while I'm not there? And so we've had to have a
problem.
Yeah, that's right. And we've had to have conversations with her about, like, as hard as this is, and you know the bullying is not great, and we're working with the school and a teacher to try and sort those pieces out. Like putting those thoughts into your head and speaking for other people where they may not be even thinking about you, because out of sight, out of mind for an 8-year-old, right? But it's infinitely worse for you sitting here alone on the couch thinking, what are they thinking about me? And it's just for me, and the reason I bring it up is because this isn't a taught behavior. Like this isn't something that you get to a certain age and you start doing this. Like she's an 8-year-old child that, like, when we're a fairly open family, like we talk about everything and we don't have secrets, and you know we're all about communication, and she's hidden this stuff and these feelings from us. So I bring it up just to say, like, this, an 8-year-old child or a 50-year-old man or woman, it doesn't matter. Like the people are going to be struggling internally all of the time. So it's just being able to be conscious of that and talk to people and try and help. You know, like you said, we're not medical professionals, but if we, as I say to my kids, like a problem shared is a problem halved. And talking about it sometimes just is enough to lessen some of that weight.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I don't like, but I like what you said in terms of effectively it doesn't matter about the background, right? I mean, you know, you could be someone completely senior, you could be a CEO of a company, you could be an 8-year-old kid, as you say, it doesn't matter your background.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know what's going on inside someone, and being able to just be kind and offer that ear, offer that moment of just being able to listen is so important. I've had friends who have gone through similar challenges. I've had people who are very, very close to me who have gone through challenges, and I'm so proud of like how they've gone through what they're going through. And you don't need to do much apart from just be there for those people. And I really like what you said there about how your family has this policy of being open. And that's sometimes all that is needed, right? It's just that ability to feel comfortable, feel like you've got that safe space.
Yeah. I've always said to my kids, and it's funny, like I had a conversation recently with some friends, because we don't generally close doors in my house, like there's no bedroom doors, like
literal open door policy.
yeah. And that's like I don't want any part of my house to feel like it's out of bounds for my kids, because they live here, right? Like they're part of the family. And I remember being a kid, like my parents' bedroom was like you had to stand on the doorway and you could only go in if you're invited in, and then you were in for whatever the purpose was and then get out. Like and so I never wanted that for my kids, and it was the same emotionally. Like I won't go into my childhood, but my dad in particular wasn't super great at talking about emotions. So it was kind of just pat on the back, yeah, you'll be right, and kind of off you go. And I didn't want that for my kids. I didn't want to be that just, pat on the back as we're passing in the hallway, like, yeah, chin up. I want them to be able to come to me and talk to me about anything. And we've always tried to be as open as possible about that. And, when we're struggling, my wife and I, we'll tell the kids, like, I'm having a bad day, and I'll apologize up front if I'm short or grumpy or whatever the case may be. And, I'm pretty lucky. I've got 4 little girls who will then come up and give me a hug and a kiss and it'll be okay, daddy. And often that's, like you were saying, like enough. Like, oh yeah, I did need that hug. And it
I think
turns the day around.
I think that's it, isn't it? Even just being understood in those scenarios, like Katie, my girlfriend, she's somehow managed to get me into TikTok of all things. So great, I'm doing the endless scrolling. But there's been some videos on there which we've really related to, actually, and it's some of those ones where they say things like, your boyfriend's having a bad day, there's this, and like just give example scenarios. And there was one where it was just so perfect. Like it was talking about, he may snap, he may do this, he may do that. It's not because he doesn't like you or not because of any of this. It's because, these things are triggering his anxiety, or this is happening. And I just showed her that, and I was, she completely gets it because, we're both very open about our mental health as well. And it was just such a perfect, TikTok is all really short, right, in terms of the videos that you get. And for something in 10, 15 seconds to just encapsulate it and just make it so well understood was just absolutely brilliant. And that just brought me back to what you were saying there in terms of just even to be able to have a hug from your daughters, or, just to say, this is how I'm feeling. Sometimes just to be understood is enough, I think, in those scenarios, and it just brings some comfort to you.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. And it's funny, like when I talk to some of my friends that I know have struggled through some mental health things, like I think that the understanding from other people and the acceptance of yourself and what you're going through and acknowledging those feelings, I guess back to some of the things that you were talking about at the start, is really like the key to being able to dig out of those holes. And I have a friend who he's like done a complete 180. Like when we were did our initial employment training together in the military, and then we both ended up in special forces at the same time, and we deployed to Afghanistan together and all sorts of stuff. And like, if you had told me 10 years ago that this guy would be a mental health champion today and have written a book about thriving with PTSD and all that sort of stuff, honestly, I would have laughed at you. I was like, that is not the guy. I remember we were in Afghanistan and he called me at like 3:00 in the morning because he'd had 13 scoops of pre-workout at like 7 a.m. the previous morning, just to like, he'd been upping it by one every day to see how many he could take. And he was like talking like a race caller, like, hey mate, how you going? Blah, 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 blah. And I don't think he ended up going to sleep until like 4:00 the next afternoon or something. So I was like, this dude is just a loose cannon. Tons of fun, like a great bloke to hang out with. But I was like, this dude is not a mental health champion. And then he talks about a lot of his stuff that, he hit rock bottom in terms of like PTSD, and saw some stuff on one of the deployments, and he shares it pretty openly, and I don't think he'll mind me sharing, but he, on one of his deployments, went away and like literally sat in a room 12 hours a day watching drones carry out strikes. So came home pretty messed up and self-medicated with alcohol and drugs and stuff, and hit rock bottom. And then it took all of that and, acceptance of himself, and then some acceptance from his family and friends to be able to come out the other side. And like legitimately now he's a meditation and breathing coach. And like I said, he's written a book and he does podcasts and all that sort of stuff to try and help people on the other side. So I guess to amplify your point, right? Like no one person is going to experience the same thing as another, and everybody's journey is going to be different, and how they get out the other side is going to be different, but everybody's equally worthy of having that ear to listen. So I think that's, it's honestly, like if you to look at him, you'd look at me, even yourself, like, like you're somebody that I look up to, like professionally, like what you've been able to achieve, and you're standing inside our organization and everything. And like to hear that you've had your own struggles is like, honestly, like a shock to me. I was like, oh wow, like Chris seems to have everything together, right? And he does his plays and all that sort of stuff. Like this dude, like it's a Renaissance man. Like how does this dude struggle?
And I think that's the it brings nicely actually onto a point I was going to make, which they're going back to that point of understanding. I also want to make sure that anyone listening in who hasn't experienced any of the things that we're talking about and is just listening in and thinking, I don't get it, I just want you to know as well that that is okay. I'm not expecting anyone to just, after listening to us talk about this, go, right, okay, I understand absolutely the challenges you're going through. Not at all. I think the best reaction that I ever had when I came back to work after the recent challenges I mentioned was I spoke to someone fairly senior within the company, and we were just talking about returning to work and talking about kind of my experiences. And their message to me was, I can't lie to you and say I understand it, because I don't. But what I want you to know is you've got the support you need. And even that, like from an understanding point of view, for someone to say, I don't get it, but you've got the support, is enough. Like, you know, you don't have to completely be on that same wavelength and that same level. Just to know that people are there for you and you have that support is enough as well. So just wanted to make sure that was very clear for everyone.
Yeah, and I guess that's probably part of the reason why people potentially struggle with it and don't open up about it as well, is because they're worried about nobody's going to understand where I'm at and how I feel and those sorts of things. And you're absolutely right. Like people probably won't, but that ability for somebody to show, I don't know if empathy is the right word. It's definitely sympathy is definitely not the right word, but you know, just that compassion, I would suppose, and just say, look, you are going through something. What you are going through is real. I haven't been through that, but I will help you however I can. And that's, it's invaluable. Like you literally cannot put a price on having that support.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But I think that, like, if I think back to like friends that I know that have, what's the term, thrived and survived, that have been in the deepest, darkest depths. And I think we've touched on it a little bit, like the recognition that it is a problem, that they can't do it on their own is something that people need to come to as well. And I think you've definitely touched on it in this call. And like, you're going to have challenges. There are going to be days where you don't want to get out of bed. And even for people that seem to have it all, like the CEOs or whoever, like there are going to be days where like, I really don't want to put my pants and shoes on today and talk to people. But taking a breath and acknowledging that, and we've said it a few times now, just knowing that it's okay not to be okay, and just have that break, talk to somebody about it. And I think that's definitely helped with my family. And I mentioned it before, is that we try and be as honest as we can. It's like, I'm having a bad day. Like, you know, I've got back-to-back meetings from 7:30 in the morning till 6 o'clock tonight. I'm stressed. I've got deadlines. I've got whatever else. And I'm just apologizing up front, because it's going to be a bad day. You're not going to see me a lot. I'm going to be cranky. And
is there are there certain things that you find help you deal with that? Like when I was just, as you were explaining that, I was thinking about how I would, deal with some of those scenarios. And I think a couple of things for me, for example, that have helped, and again, I'm not saying they'll help for everyone or anyone, but personally for me, one of them was doing mindfulness and doing kind of those regular certain amount of time a day, just deep breathing, just reflecting and not even really thinking about anything, just being present. And then also doing something called a Mindfulness Diary. And if you never looked at that, for anyone listening in here, definitely take a look at that. And I can promise I don't have shares in Mindfulness Diaries or anything. But for me, just being able to take the time out each day, ask myself the questions about, how is today going to be a great day? What am I thankful for? And then when you get to the end of the day, what really went well today and what were the things that really stood out and made you happy? Just taking those few moments, it can be something as simple as, someone said hello to me outside, or someone gave me a genuine smile. I remember when I was at like the darkest points during that last year, the first day that I wrote in the diary was when I went out for a walk by myself, obviously in isolation because everything going on, but someone just gave just the most genuine beaming smile ever, and it filled me with so much joy that day. It still stands out right now, and you would never think that just someone smiling at you would cause such a memory to stir. Yeah. But things like that, for example, I found have helped me. So I was just curious, given we were on that topic, what about yourself there, Andrew? Do you feel there's anything in particular that has helped you out along the way?
Yeah, no, the mindfulness stuff, and as weird as this does sound, and people may not believe it, but you're actually given a lot of training in the military about how to cope with stress and that sort of stuff. So that's something that I've always tried to, for the last, I can't say always, but for the last 10 plus years, I've tried to incorporate that into like who I am and how I cope with stuff. So I guess trying to just break up pieces and, what can I control? What can't I control? Just take some breaths. Like, yep, I can control this, and this. Okay, like great. And I guess similar to what you were saying, like how can I influence that to be a good thing? What's the result I want to get out of this? And try and focus on those positives. But the other thing is a book that I've reread recently. It's called the Fish Philosophy.
Okay.
I don't know if you've heard about it, but it's a lady who wrote a book years ago, and she actually worked in Seattle, and she worked right near the Pike Place Fish Market, and she was sort of struggling with a job and really miserable, and she walked down to the Pike Place Fish Market and saw the guys throwing the fish and all those sorts of things, and she was like, these dudes like really seem to love their job, and for all intents and purposes, they should hate their job. Like they're exposed to the wind, they stink like fish. They have to deal with customers like all day, every day. Like, what's their secret? And she ended up interviewing them and talking to them about it, and wrote a book series. And their whole focus was, we could choose to focus on the negative stuff and those crap pieces, or we could choose to focus on the positive pieces that like people literally travel from around the world to come here and see us. So like, that's amazing. Like we're a tourist attraction. People love us. Like they come here to hear us yell and throw the fish and do all these sorts of things. And that's an amazing opportunity to help impact these people's lives. So we choose to be positive and have a great day. Yeah. And so I try to choose my attitude, and I get down a little bit sometimes and stressed, and moving across the world in the middle of a pandemic and all those sorts of things has been hard, but you choose to focus on the good things and the opportunities and those sorts of things, and I think that kind of helps. And it may not work for everybody, but it definitely works for me. But again, it comes back to that whole acknowledging that you're in the bad mood or the bad place, and like trying to. It took a lot of work. Like I first read that book maybe 17 years ago. And so it took a long time for me to be able to put those practices into place. And then in all honesty, I lost it recently. And I was choosing to focus on the negative stuff and look at the bad pieces of it rather than the positive and the good pieces. And that's why I reread the book, and I'm trying to come out the other side. And the other piece is like exercise for me. Getting out of the house, and I can't run or play basketball anymore, but going for a walk with my wife, disconnecting, like just putting my phone in my pocket, putting it on mute, not touching it, and take half an hour that's just for me and my wife to talk and get some fresh air and get some sunlight, and it makes a world of difference.
Yeah, no, I completely get it. I think it's very easy to not check in with yourself, I think is the way I would put it. And, I've said to Katie, for example, that just because I'm not doing this mindfulness diary every day doesn't mean it's been a waste, or that, I don't believe in that stuff. Those things that I was doing every day in the diary, looking at how am I going to make today great? What's what am I thankful for today? All these things are just things I try and naturally adopt. And as you were saying that, I was thinking, actually, there are certain things that I've probably slipped off and maybe not doing as well on, but notice now I'm doing the whole putting pressure on myself to do a thing, right? So, it's just all about being conscious of you, I think. You know you, or maybe you don't, and you want to explore that a bit more, and that's okay. I think trying to understand what is going on there and the reasoning behind some of those thoughts is a good thing to go and do. And for me, at least, those mindfulness pieces helped, and it sounds like for you as well, they've been instilled slightly different way, but still helped there as well.
Yeah, and I think that's like when I've talked to people about it, like when I start sharing some of, like my military experiences and some of the training that I've had, they're like, oh, I wouldn't have thought that you would get stressed. And it's like, I guess it's similar to what you were saying before, like in terms of triggers and all those sorts of things, and no two persons like opinions are the same, and no two people find the same thing stressful. Yeah. Like I don't have a problem talking in front of crowds. Love getting up on stage and presenting and doing that sort of stuff. My wife absolutely hates it. She doesn't even like recording videos on her phone in case somebody judges what she says or something like that. Right. Yeah. So those stresses and how people deal with, again, what they consider to be pressure and all those sorts of things are different. So to your point, right, like acknowledging those things or understanding those things about yourself are really going to help. And, I'm not asking you to go on a mental health retreat and like dig into who you are or anything like that. But, if you spend 5 minutes a day, like instead of scrolling through TikTok or Instagram or something, just have a think about what has annoyed me today, or what has made me happy today. What do I avoid doing because I don't like to do it? And they're like, I think we made the point before, like some of those things are subconscious. You don't even realize that you're avoiding those things. But then, putting a little bit of a spotlight on, one way or the other, what do I really like to do? And what do I really not like to do can help some of that awareness and help you figure out like, oh yeah, like I don't do this thing because I don't enjoy it, but what about it don't I enjoy? Oh, it's this. Okay, that makes me stressed or anxious or whatever the case may be. And you can, if you, like we're talking about it, like identify the problem or the cause that gives you the symptom, then it's okay, then what do I need to put in place? And it's like, we talk to customers about their cloud stuff to bring it full circle. And as what mitigations do you have in place? Like, what are your gaps? Like we would talk about it and I guess that was in my article as well. Like we talk about our physical ailments and things like that, but we don't talk about the mental ones. And it's the same thing. Like you would talk about you would write a resume and you would talk about your skills, right? Like my strengths are X, Y, Z, and you would highlight that stuff. But for you to grow and deal with, for lack of a better term, your emotional baggage and the things that might bring you down, you have to acknowledge that as well. Like what are my weaknesses? What are the things that are going to, and you've used the word a lot, like to trigger me to go down that, into that deep dark hole. And, if you can acknowledge those and start building, you can put those mitigations in place to help you deal with it. Or if if you don't want a mitigation in place, like you can start building a strategy to get better at those things, to make them stop being that thing that does trigger you. And it's not a quick fix at all. It's an ongoing, like I said to my customers, this is a dynamic thing that's living and breathing. Like you
absolutely.
I've said it to a few friends, and like you take your car in for a service, like you take your pets to the vet, like you polish your cars, you clean your dishes, you know what I mean? Like all these things that are just regular maintenance tasks for everything else.
Isn't it?
But you don't do it for yourself. Like you get a haircut, great.
Yes.
Like, but you still like, your brain and your mind is still something that you need to, like, you have to spend the time. And I'm just disappointed, I guess, with myself that it took me, 30 odd years to really realize that, to get to the point. And I'm glad I did, because I'm trying to help my kids and trying to make them see that, like, it's something that you have to work on your whole life. No one's like, I've probably been told 1,000 times in my life, like no one's perfect,
Yeah.
but like the self-awareness, I guess, is really the key to being able to, like, honestly, like for you to be able to come, in my opinion, again, not a medical expert, but my opinion, the self-awareness and understanding where your gaps are, where your holes are, what's going to bring you down is like a super key for you to be able to come out the other side and be happy and healthy.
And I think, excuse me, I think that's it, isn't it? Is self-awareness from a number of levels. Like if we go back to the point that you mentioned about, physical health versus mental health, if someone has, has been feeling unwell, throwing up or whatever it may be, for example, or whatever scenario has been wrong from a physical perspective, that's very easy to relate to. We can see it. We can, we can relate to that. But the mental health side is always the challenging one. And I think the first step, like you say, is just being able to have that self-check-in, have that self-realization almost of, hey, I'm not okay, or hey, I'm feeling this, or actually this is making me a little anxious, and what is causing that, and just being able to allow that to happen. Yeah. And I don't mean, allow that thing to happen and let things go out of control, but I mean just inspect that kind of thought, and understand what is it that is actually making you feel that way, and just explore that a bit. Just that self-realization, as you say, really, really helps.
Yeah, and then, like, to go back to my 8-year-old daughter, like for her, and what I've been able to talk about with her is it's the fear of the fear that's now holding her back.
Yeah.
And I thought that was the way she's like, I'm scared to be scared. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. Like, and when you put it like that, it's like, oh, right. Like, so she's trying to avoid the things that are going to make her scared. But then it's becoming, and I guess back to what we were talking about before, like the whole compounding thing, right? Like, because then she's scared of then being scared because she doesn't want to feel like that anymore. And it's like, part of it is heartbreaking, but then, as her parent, I've got to try and now help her deal with those coping mechanisms to build that resilience, I guess, for lack of a better term. And I'm just glad that, like, for me, that I've been able to have this conversation with her at such a young age and help her identify some. And a lot of it's what we've been talking about today, is that you have to acknowledge those feelings and, accept them, and, let's help you build the strategies to avoid being scared. And I think that's I don't know, we've been talking for a while now, but I think that's what might get some people stuck, for lack of a better term, because for them it's, whatever thing they may be scared, anxious, stressed about or whatever, like the thought of changing that thing, be it professionally, personally, whatever the case may be, can sometimes be even more daunting than the thing itself, because humans as a whole fear change. But what if, do you know what I mean? Like, so what if this doesn't work? What if I make this decision and it's worse? So they just get that analysis paralysis type thing of, I can't make a change because it's going to be horrible. And then it just becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy, because they're in this environment, whatever environment it may be, that just keeps, the term I've used with friends, it just becomes like this self-licking ice cream. Like, it's just, it's there and it can't change because it won't change. But if you're then also scared to change it, then nothing will change. So it just becomes this insurmountable hill that you can't get over.
Yeah. And I remember the word I was trying to think of earlier that completely escapes me. And it's this idea of irrational thoughts, right? And, when you're in this kind of scenario, this pit, like I mentioned earlier, which sounds kind of similar to what you're describing there, that there are these thoughts that are happening and scared of being scared. In the moment makes complete sense. And to someone looking out, from outwards looking in, is able to kind of help with that rationalization process. And that's really kind of what we're talking about. Again, not the health expert, but what we're talking about, right, is, with mental health, those thoughts that are coming up are not necessarily rational, but it's that environmental factor and all of those thoughts that have come together to start bringing up that particular way of thinking. And like you said about the scared being scared, that's completely okay. And there is a way through it. And I'm really glad that your daughter is able to be very open with you and talk about that, because I'm sure that will help no end.
Yeah, well, hopefully. But I guess like the counterpoint to that and is though that if you present these feelings to people and whatever the if you take the step to talk to somebody about it at the same time, like that's brave in and of itself and fantastic, and that's a huge step. But like you have to be also, I guess this is the as I said, the counterpoint. You have to be open to receiving that feedback, and that person may tell you like you're being silly, or whatever other terminology that they may come up with, and that's not. And I guess this is for me, and how I had to, like, when my wife was talking to me, when I was saying about but I'm never going to be able to play 5-on-5 basketball with my kids and that sort of stuff. And she was like, if that's the biggest problem that you've got, like, then you're doing okay. Like, you can still go and watch them play. You can still coach them. You can still be involved. Just because you can't physically be out there, it hasn't ruined your life. And to be honest, like, that stung a little bit, like the first time she said that to me, and I was like, what? But it, like, she was right. Did I like? I can
it's
still
intended
be
in a loving way rather than the way it sounds. Right. I know what you mean.
Yeah, and I guess that for, like, as much as it's going to sting, like, please don't, like, if you do take that step and you're brave enough to go and talk to somebody, like, don't dismiss what they say. Like, they're not saying what they're saying to hurt you. They're saying what they're saying to try and help you see the other side of that coin. And please, like, be open to that. Be open to the context that they're giving you that advice or that guidance from, and just be willing to view it from their lens. And I think that will definitely help.
Absolutely.
Because it did for me.
To another cloud concept, externalizing states, right?
Yep.
There we go. Managed to get a transition in there. But externalizing state, I think, being able to, as you said there, just put yourselves in their shoes. Because again, thinking about that rationality of thought, when you take that feedback, you're going to process that and interpret that in some way. And like you say, it's not intended in that way. Whereas if you try and look at it from their perspective of, there are other ways you can do the same thing, there are other ways you can help, it's really the intent behind that message, not, oh, come on, it's not the end of the world, you're not going to do that anymore. It's meant in a different way. And that's
giving you
also hard. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Good. Well, I guess we've been talking for, I think, about 50 minutes now. I'm just thinking in terms of maybe starting to wrap us up a little bit here.
Sure.
I guess when you think back, Andrew, to the article that you wrote and you put together, is there anything that we've not necessarily touched upon here so far that you wanted to talk about a bit more and for us to explore at all?
No, I think we've covered everything, and I think we've summed it up, like, at various points, is that it doesn't matter who the person is, what level they are, what it appears that they've achieved. Like, everybody can have their struggles, and acknowledging that both yourself as the person with the struggles or as the external person viewing that person is huge. And then being able to vocalize that, or even, it doesn't have to be vocal, it could be a text message, it could be an email, but being able to share that burden with somebody else, and more importantly, as the person that's receiving that, being open to those person's feelings, not dismissive. Like, it's okay to provide alternate viewpoints, but please don't dismiss you're being silly and just leave it at that. Like, acknowledge it, and give options and feedback to that person about the positive stuff, and for the person taking that feedback, just assume positive intent, for the most part.
Absolutely.
And then, just please talk about it, and please understand it's okay not to be okay.
Excellent. A good message for us to end on there, I think. So, Andrew, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart coming on and talking about this. I even for me, right, talking about this, it's not something I've publicly as much as this at least spoken about. So been tough on me, this one as well. And I can imagine the same for you, talking about kind of the family scenarios, the past as well, and with your friends. So just thank you for telling your story. Thank you for coming on. And for anyone listening, I hope that this helps. So with that, not going to do a wrap up. I'm just going to leave it there and just say thank you for joining. And of course, very welcome to come on and talk about this again.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Andrew.